My journey to Earth began with curiosity, like everything else in my life. As the Princess of Virelia, I had seen countless worlds, each teeming with life forms, all different, yet oddly similar. But humans fascinated me. From the very first time I heard of them, I was intrigued by their primitive yet strangely endearing nature. I'd spent countless hours studying their cultures, their technology, their history, yet there was always something about them that eluded me, something deep within their behavior that I couldn't quite grasp. It was time to witness it firsthand, when my father, King Thorne, decreed that I would travel to Earth as part of a diplomatic mission. I saw it as an opportunity to finally understand these creatures beyond what the records had taught me. I was not just any princess. I was an explorer at heart, eager to uncover the mysteries of distant planets, and Earth, it seemed, held mysteries beyond anything I could have imagined. When I first set foot on Earth, the chaos of the bustling cities overwhelmed my senses. The air was thick with the scent of machinery, food, and something entirely foreign, the smell of human emotion. As I walked among them, I couldn't help but feel the raw energy, the wild unpredictability that made them so different from my people. Their technology was archaic, their way of life inefficient and unrefined. But there was something beneath the surface that made them so intoxicatingly complex. I had been briefed on their customs, their systems, their wars, and their peace. Yet there was one thing I had never been prepared for: the way they interacted with one another, the way they looked at each other. There was a rawness to it, an intensity that struck me as both primitive and beautiful. It was nothing like what I had seen on my own planet. It wasn't until I met Thorne that I realized just how little I knew about humans. Thorne was unlike anyone I had met before. He was tall, with dark hair that framed his chiseled face. His eyes were an unsettling shade of gray, like storm clouds before the rain. He wasn't a diplomat or a scholar like the others I had been assigned to meet. He was just human. I was told he was a guide, a local who knew the ins and outs of Earth's lesser-known places, but there was something about him that made him stand out from the rest. Our first meeting was nothing like what I had expected. I thought I would be surrounded by humans who would follow the protocol of a princess's visit, but instead, Thorne greeted me with a quiet smirk and an unbothered demeanor, his gaze never quite meeting mine in the way others would. "What do you want, princess?" he asked, his voice low and rough like gravel scraping against metal. I hadn't expected the directness. On Virelia, we were taught to respect authority, to bow and curtsy, even in the presence of lesser beings. But here, on Earth, I felt unimportant. I had expected some form of reverence, a sign of awe, but instead, I was met with indifference. "You'll find that Earth is not the place of rituals you might be used to," he continued, reading my thoughts as though they were written on my face. He was right, of course. I had learned that humans valued sincerity over formalities, and it was a lesson that would change the way I saw them forever. As he led me through the streets of his city, I noticed the way people interacted with one another, passionate, often brash, but filled with an intensity I had never experienced before. At first, I thought it was just another strange quirk of human behavior, something I could chalk up to their social chaos. But the deeper I delved into the culture, the more it became clear. There was something primal about their relationships, something raw and unfiltered. I couldn't help but be intrigued. And with each passing day, my fascination with Thorne and the humans grew stronger. As days passed, I spent more time with Thorne. He was unlike anyone I had ever encountered, unpredictable, blunt, and surprisingly knowledgeable about the world I had come to study. I had assumed he was merely a guide, someone I could rely on, to navigate the complexities of Earth. But it quickly became apparent that he was more than that. He was a doorway to understanding the darkest corners of human nature, and each day with him was like peeling back another layer of a mystery I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. I had spent my life studying alien species, their habits, their social systems, and their behaviors. But nothing in my studies had prepared me for the complex dynamics of human relationships. The more I observed, the more I realized how flawed they were, yet how beautiful. Humans fought with passion, loved with intensity, and even hated with an almost reckless abandon. They were creatures of extremes, driven by emotions they couldn't always control. Thorne, for example, was a contradiction. He was both ruthless and tender, distant and yet oddly magnetic. It wasn't just his looks that pulled me in, though I couldn't deny the effect he had on me, but the way he carried himself, the way he interacted with those around him. He never seemed to conform to any social norm, always challenging the boundaries set by Earth society. One evening, we found ourselves walking through the quiet streets of the city. The sun had long since set, and the night air was cool against my skin. I was wrapped in the comfort of my cloak, the soft fabric brushing against the sharpness of my armor. We were alone, the city's noise far behind us as we wandered deeper into the unfamiliar part of town. It was a part of Earth that I had never been told about, ugly, chaotic, filled with half-finished buildings and shadowy figures moving in and out of alleyways. The underbelly of human society, where the rules didn't apply. "There's a place I want to show you," Thorne said, his voice low and almost secretive. His eyes glinted in the dim light, an unreadable expression on his face. I wasn't sure what he meant, but my curiosity got the best of me, and I followed him without hesitation. We arrived at a building, its exterior worn and aged. It wasn't much to look at, but there was something about it that made my heart race. As we entered, I was hit by the overwhelming scent of sweat, grease, and something else I couldn't quite place. Danger, perhaps. Inside, humans milled about, some laughing, some arguing, and others engaged in quiet conversations. There was no order here, no respect for space or decorum. It was raw and untamed, much like the humans I had been studying. "Welcome to the real Earth," Thorne said, as though he had read the shock on my face. "This is where humans come to lose themselves." I looked around unsettled. This was not the Earth I had read about in my textbooks. This was not the controlled, predictable place I had studied for years. The humans here weren't like the ones I had met before. They were wild, unpredictable, and untethered. Thorne led me further into the building, toward a dimly lit room at the back. There, I saw a strange ritual taking place. Humans were sitting in a circle, some with drinks in their hands, others simply watching. At the center of the circle, two humans, one male, one female, were engaged in a strange, intimate dance, moving with a rhythm I didn't understand. It wasn't sexual in the way I had expected, but it was something far deeper. I had heard rumors of human mating rituals, but this was different. There was no traditional courtship here, no flowery gestures of affection. Instead, it was a brutal display of power, of control, of a struggle for dominance. The female was not passive. She fought back, pushing the male away at times, only to draw him closer again. Their connection was intense, raw, and incredibly unsettling to watch. Thorne must have sensed my discomfort because he spoke up, his voice unusually soft. "Humans are complicated, Aelara. We don't love the way you do. We don't live by your rules. Here, emotions are currency, and sometimes we take what we want." I wasn't sure I understood him completely, but something in his words struck a chord deep within me. This wasn't about affection or love, at least not in the way I had known it. This was something darker, something dangerous. I had read about human violence, but I hadn't expected to see it so raw, so unfiltered. "What do you mean, take what you want?" I asked, the words slipping from my mouth before I could stop them. Thorne's gaze met mine, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of something I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just a casual look. It was something deeper, something that made my heart race. "It means," he said slowly, "that humans will do anything to get what they desire, even if it means crossing lines they never thought they would." His words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. I didn't understand it yet, but I would soon. What I didn't know was that this was only the beginning of my journey into the darkness of human nature. The days following that night were a blur of confusion and intrigue. I couldn't shake the images from the building. Those humans locked in that raw and brutal dance, their desires intermingling with violence. Thorne's words echoed in my mind. We take what we want. The phrase seemed simple, but it carried so much weight, so much hidden meaning. I knew I was only scratching the surface of something far darker, something far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The more I spent time with Thorne, the more I began to understand that my assumptions about human nature had been completely off. The humans I had met in the cities, those who followed the protocol and the rules, were only one side of a much larger picture. What I was seeing now, what I was learning from Thorne, was the side of humanity that was reckless, passionate, and utterly untamed. One evening, we ventured out again. I had learned by now that Earth was not a place for careful planning. It was a place for impulsiveness, for throwing caution to the wind and seeing what came of it. Thorne had grown more comfortable with me, or perhaps I had grown more comfortable with him. Either way, I could sense the shift in our relationship, a pull between us, an unspoken understanding that neither of us was willing to confront. We were walking through a quieter part of the city this time, the streets dimly lit, with only the occasional passerby. It felt like a world away from the chaos we had encountered before, but something about it was just as unsettling. Thorne wasn't talking much, his eyes fixed ahead as we moved through the streets. I couldn't tell if he was thinking or planning something, but I knew he wasn't in a hurry to speak. It wasn't like him. "Thorne," I said softly, breaking the silence. "What is it that you really want from me?" The question hung in the air between us, and I could see the brief flicker of surprise in his eyes. He hadn't expected me to ask, I could tell. But it wasn't a question born from suspicion or doubt. It was a question born from curiosity, from the need to understand him. I had never been so uncertain about anything in my life, but with him, everything seemed unclear. I wasn't sure where the boundaries between us lay. He stopped walking and turned to face me, his face a mix of amusement and something darker. There was a dangerous glint in his eyes, something primal, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "You're asking the wrong question," Thorne said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "What I want from you doesn't matter." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He took a step closer, and the sudden proximity made my heart race. There was something about him that I couldn't ignore. The way he moved, the way he spoke, it was all so powerful. And yet, there was something underneath it all, something I couldn't quite understand. "It's not about what I want, Aelara. It's about what you want," he said. "Humans don't ask for permission. We don't wait around for what's right. We take, we consume, and we don't look back." I felt a knot form in my stomach, a strange combination of excitement and fear. I had come to Earth to learn about humans, to understand them, but what I was learning now was nothing like what I had expected. For the first time, I began to question everything I knew about myself, everything I had been taught about, my own people, the rules, the control, the restraint. We were taught to be civilized, to be cautious, to always ask for consent. But here, on Earth, it seemed like consent was a luxury, something that was either given in the heat of the moment or completely ignored. "Are you saying," I asked, my voice trembling slightly, "that humans don't care about the rules? That you don't care about consent? About what's right?" Thorne let out a short laugh, the sound harsh and unsettling. "Rules? Aelara, the only rules we follow are the ones that serve us. Humans don't live by anyone's standards, but our own." His words hit me like a slap, and for a moment I stood there, paralyzed by the weight of what he was saying. The idea that humans could just take what they wanted, without concern for the consequences, was alien to me. But there was a part of me, an unexpected part, that found it compelling. "You sound like a predator," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though it came out quieter than I intended. Thorne's eyes flashed with something darker. "Maybe I am." The tension between us thickened, and for the first time since meeting him, I felt a raw, almost animalistic pull toward him. There was something about the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, that made everything inside me feel out of control. And yet, there was a part of me that wanted to understand it, wanted to understand him. I knew he was hiding something. I knew he wasn't telling me the whole truth, that there was more to the story of human nature than he was letting on. But I couldn't deny that whatever it was intoxicating. It was something I didn't know how to resist, something that made every part of my being tremble. "You're not like the others," I said, almost to myself. Thorne smiled darkly, a knowing look crossing his face. "No, Aelara, I'm not." And as we continued our walk through the quiet streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that my understanding of humans, of everything, was about to be turned upside down. This wasn't just about learning their culture anymore. This was something more personal, something far more dangerous. The days that followed were filled with a kind of magnetic tension. I couldn't quite explain it, but something between Thorne and me was shifting. We were no longer just a princess and a guide. There was something more, something deeper. I had felt it in the way our conversations had changed, in the way his eyes lingered on mine for just a second longer than they should. And I knew, deep down, that I was no longer merely an observer of Earth's mysteries. I was a part of them. But as much as I wanted to pretend I was unaffected, I couldn't deny the effect Thorne was having on me. Every touch, every glance, every word from him sent a rush through me, leaving me questioning everything I had once believed about myself. My control, my rationality, my upbringing, they were all slipping through my fingers like sand. We found ourselves walking together more often now, through the city, down quiet streets, or into the wild parts of town where the rules didn't exist. Thorne never explained why he chose these places where the air was thick with smoke and tension, but there was a sense of peace in them, an unsettling peace that made me feel more alive than I ever had before. One night, as we walked through a narrow alleyway that smelled of old paper and forgotten memories, Thorne stopped suddenly. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with surprising force, pulling me to a halt. I turned to face him, and the look in his eyes made my heart skip a beat. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and grave. It was the first time I had heard him speak with such seriousness, as if something were weighing heavily on him. I nodded, but before I could say anything, he was already walking toward a nearby building, motioning for me to follow. It was an abandoned warehouse, the walls covered in peeling paint and graffiti, the windows broken and forgotten. Inside, it was dimly lit, the air stale and thick with dust. There were no sounds except for the echo of our footsteps as we moved deeper into the building. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The darkness inside felt suffocating, and I had a sudden urge to leave. But something in Thorne's demeanor held me there, rooted to the spot. "This," he said, turning to face me, "is where humans come when they want to forget. It's where we go to let go of all the rules, all the things that hold us back." I stared at him, not fully understanding what he meant. What could he possibly be talking about? Earth's rules were clear enough. Violence, disorder, chaos, they all existed in their own corners of the world, but this was different. It was as if he was inviting me into something darker, something far more dangerous. "Let go of what?" I asked, stepping closer to him. I couldn't help myself. I was drawn to him in a way I couldn't explain. His presence felt like a force, a pull I couldn't resist. Thorne's gaze softened, but there was still something dark behind his eyes. "Let go of the masks we wear, the act, the pretense. Here we are just human." I didn't know what he meant by that, but there was something about his words that felt like a warning I didn't know how to heed. Suddenly, the door behind us creaked open, and a group of humans entered, their laughter cutting through the silence of the warehouse. They were loud, boisterous, and full of energy, their eyes alight with excitement. They looked at us, at me, without hesitation, as if I were just another part of the scenery. It was unsettling, the way they didn't even acknowledge my presence as something worth noting. I wasn't a princess here. I wasn't anything but an observer. One of the humans, a tall man with dark hair and a rough face, walked up to Thorne and slapped him on the back with a loud laugh. "You brought her here. Is this your new project?" He nodded toward me, his eyes scanning me with a mixture of curiosity and something else, something far more primal. Thorne's expression didn't change, though I noticed the slight tightening of his jaw. He didn't speak for a moment, his gaze fixed on the man. "I didn't bring her here for your amusement," Thorne said, his tone cold. "She's not a project." The man laughed again, shrugging. "Whatever you say, but don't expect us to hold back. You know the rules." At those words, a chill ran down my spine. "The rules?" I asked, my voice tight with the growing sense of unease. Thorne's eyes met mine, a flicker of something dark and dangerous passing between us. "The rules here are simple, Aelara," he said, stepping closer to me. "There are no rules." The words hung in the air, thick with meaning. I didn't understand, but I felt the weight of them, the weight of the unspoken truth behind them. The rules I had been raised with, the boundaries I had always known, didn't exist here. On Earth, there was only chaos, only desire, only raw, unfiltered emotion. And as the humans around us began to engage in their own chaotic dance of passion and violence, I felt something stir deep within me, something that had been dormant, something I couldn't control. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave this place, to escape the feeling of being out of control, but at the same time, I couldn't tear myself away. I was addicted to the intensity, to the unpredictability of it all. And I knew, deep down, that I was beginning to understand Thorne's world more than I ever wanted to. "Do you want to see what happens when the masks come off?" Thorne asked, his voice low and almost hypnotic. I didn't know how to answer, but I couldn't look away. The longer I stayed on Earth, the more I realized I was sinking deeper into something I couldn't escape. Thorne had become both a guide and a trap, his presence a constant pull that blurred the lines between fascination and danger. He had taken me to places I could never have imagined, shown me a side of humanity that was raw and unrefined, and every day I spent with him, I felt myself slipping further into the chaos. One night, as we walked through the city's more dangerous quarters, I found myself asking questions I had never considered before. Questions about power, about control, about the very nature of what it meant to want. On Virelia, we had been taught that emotions were a weakness, something to be controlled, monitored. But humans wore their emotions on their sleeves. They embraced them, used them as weapons, and in some cases they let their darkest desires run wild without regret. It was a part of their world I had never truly understood until now. "I don't get it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper as we walked through the crowded streets. The hum of voices and the clatter of distant machinery filled the air, but I couldn't focus on anything but the question that had been plaguing my mind. How can you live like this? How can you just take what you want without considering the consequences? Thorne didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the crowds, always alert, always in control. But when he finally turned to face me, there was something different in his expression. It wasn't the confident, self-assured look he usually wore. It was almost vulnerable. "Because, Aelara, sometimes wanting is the only thing that matters," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Humans are driven by desire, by need. We don't have the luxury of restraint. We go after what we want, no matter the cost." I shook my head, trying to grasp his words, but they only made the pit in my stomach grow deeper. "But don't you care? Don't you care about the people you hurt? About the lives you ruin?" His gaze softened, just slightly, and for a moment, he looked like he might say something different, something more comforting. But then, as quickly as it appeared, the moment was gone, replaced by the same cold, unyielding mask he always wore. "I've told you before, Aelara," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Humans don't live by your rules. We don't care about what's right. We care about what we want." I felt the weight of his words settle over me, suffocating me. There was a truth in them that I couldn't deny, and it unsettled me more, than I cared to admit. On Virelia, we had learned to suppress our instincts, to rise above them. But here, on Earth, instinct was everything. Emotion was everything. And in that moment, I realized just how alien I truly was. But the more I tried to push away the unsettling truth of his words, the more I found myself drawn to it, to him, to the chaos that seemed to consume every part of human existence. As we moved deeper into the city, the noise of the streets became a distant hum, fading into the background. Thorne had led me to another part of town, a place even more hidden, more dangerous. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the air heavy with something I couldn't quite identify. It felt like I was stepping into a world where nothing mattered but the here and now, the moment of desire, of need, of hunger. We arrived at another building, this one even more worn down and grimy than the last. It looked abandoned, yet I could feel the energy pulsing from within. Thorne glanced at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You don't have to come in," he said, though I knew he wasn't really asking. "But if you want to understand humans, really understand them, this is where you'll find the truth." I didn't hesitate. My curiosity had already taken me further than I could turn back. "What's inside?" Thorne's lips curled into a smirk, though it held no warmth. "This is where we come when we need to feed, when we need to take, when we can't hold back anymore." I didn't understand what he meant, not truly. But as he led me through the door, the realization hit me like a wave. Inside, the atmosphere was dark and chaotic. A dozen humans moved through the space, their eyes glazed with hunger, their movements frantic and desperate. There was no rhyme or reason to it, just a constant primal drive to take, to consume. It wasn't just about the physical act, I realized. It was about the need to feel something, anything, to break free from the rules, from the constraints that held them back. Thorne led me to the center of the room, where two figures were locked in a brutal struggle. The female, her face twisted in a mixture of pain and desire, was fighting against the male's advances. But it wasn't a fight for dominance. It was something more complicated, something darker. They were feeding off each other's energy, their emotions tangled in a way that felt almost suffocating to witness. I turned away, my heart racing, my mind reeling from the intensity of it all. Thorne's presence beside me felt heavier now, his words cutting through the air like a knife. "This is what humans do," he said softly. "We take. We consume. We never stop wanting. And when we find someone who wants us back, that's when it becomes dangerous." His words hit me harder than any physical blow could. In that moment, I understood. Humans weren't just driven by need, they were driven by something deeper. A hunger that couldn't be satisfied, a craving that tore through everything in its path. I felt it now, deep in my chest, a strange mix of fear and desire, a need I couldn't deny. Thorne was right. This wasn't about control, it wasn't about restraint. It was about wanting. And in that moment, I realized I had wanted him all along, and now I wasn't sure if I could walk away.